Elqui wines here in the northern parts of Chile. And as Kirk said, it's a very interesting little area we have up here, very little actually, so we'll get into that. So just quick about my background. I'm originally from Denmark, and I have a winemaking degree from Europe. I traveled the first time to Chile in 2005 to work just as a harvest assistant winemaker for two different wineries in the more central area, one which is rather large now called Los Vascos, and then another one smaller, much smaller, a high-end boutique winery called Viña Altair, which was at the time co-owned by San Pedro and Chateau d'Assaut from Saint-Emilion in France. Before that harvest in 2005 in Chile, I also worked in Bordeaux just after getting my degree in the Haut-Médoc region, and that's really spurred my interest for. I just had an enology at the time, so I was not a viticulturist or anything like that, but I easily saw working in the vineyards and stuff that I wanted to try it all. So that was a great experience for me to work in Bordeaux and get my hands dirty, also in the vineyards, not only in the cellar, trying to help out making the wine. And as I said, I went here on and did the next harvest in Chile and worked for two different wineries there for a while. After that, as I've always been in love with Pinot, we'll talk a lot about Pinot later. I've always wanted to work with Pinot Noir, so I got the chance to work in California, and I moved up to Windsor in Sonoma, and I worked for a tiny little winery for a while called La Crema, and that was pretty cool. I mean, there you could really see the big scale in terms of producing Pinot and Chardonnay. And it was fun to try, but they also had some small lots, which were handled with the utmost care. And that's where I really first saw how finicky and how delicate you have to really treat Pinot Noir, especially in the cellar, but also in the vineyard. We'll get back to that later, because we do have a small plantation down here of Pinot. When that stint was done, I saw an ad from Walla Walla, Washington State, that they were looking for an assistant winemaker at a winery called Bergevin Lane. So I applied for it. They liked my resume. We had different phone interviews, and then they got me up there. We had one face-to-face interview, and I was hired on the spot as the assistant winemaker. What happened then is that at the time there was a French lady from Burgundy, actually from Champagne, which is kind of similar, but she was the winemaker there, and she quit after 3 months. And then they told me, well, do you want to take over as the head winemaker? And I was like, heck yeah. So I was only worked there for 3 months as an assistant, and then I took over the reins in 2006 and made all the wines from 2006 until the 2011 vintage, which was my last vintage that I made for them in December of 2011. Well, let's scroll back a little bit. In 2005, I also met a girl down in Chile. So we hooked up, eventually got married, and got 2 kids. We lived together in Walla Walla. But we had always said that she's from La Serena, which is the gate, which is the entryway to the Elqui Valley, a town where I live now, a city. And when I came up here in 2005 for the first time, I tasted a Syrah from a huge winery called Falenia, which some of you might have seen in the market because they're really big. I tasted a 2002 Alta Tierra Syrah from them, which was at the time their top Syrah, and only 3 years old. And I was like, holy shit, it was so minerally and spicy, fruity at the same time. So it had everything that, wow, this is really what I need in Syrah, because I like the Rhone, but I also like some of the new old stuff. So it was kind of a little bit of the missing link right in between earthiness versus fruit versus balance versus power. And so I thought, wow, I thought that I had the idea in 2005, where you went, man, we got to move here at one point, move back and make a project down here. So spooling a little bit forward to where I was before. In 2011, we decided our kids are big enough that we have to decide whether or not we put them in school and continue our life in the US, or we try to uproot and put them in school in Chile and start our own project. And so that's what we did. We jumped all in, and we were lucky enough. I ran into a guy who owned a bunch of vineyards. First, we were going to plant ourselves. We started out buying 1 hectare of land where we're just going to plant Syrah. But then I came across a guy who already had different vineyards planted, which are the ones we still work with today. And we decided, why don't we partner up? He's always been interested in doing a wine project also. He was just used to sell all his vinifera wine grapes to the big wineries down south, like Di Martino and Santa Rita, etc. So 2012 was our first vintage. We made around 30,000 bottles between 7 different wines, a white blend, a Pinot, a Rosé, the red blend, the Malbec, the Syrah, and the Carmenère. So at that time we had 7 wines in the portfolio. That turned out to be a good idea because we sold out within way too fast. So then come 2013. There just at the time in 2012 we just had borrowed a small corner of a big distillery. Elqui Wines is also known for the grape spirit called Pisco. So we had borrowed a small corner of that distillery, where they were nice enough to let us use for fermentation. We started out fermenting with Pinot in plastic salmon bins that were hand punched down and stuff. We started also there to build some tanks. So we built six stainless tanks in that little corner. But we realized soon that, wow, this is just not good enough. It's not going to be big enough for what we want to accomplish, especially if we want to make it as high quality as absolutely possible. We can't just screw around in so little space. So then in 2013, we decided to, we went again all in with the partner, and we started building a facility that has grown and grown and grown and grown. So now we actually have the capacity to do around, we are not making that much wine at all, but we have the capacity to do around 25,000 cases. I have 42 stainless tanks in all different sizes. Open top, 10 open 4,000 kilogram tanks for only for Pinot with pneumatic punch down device. So we actually have a Pinot winery within the winery itself, which is a big investment, obviously, because they're only used between 2 or 3 weeks, depending on maceration time on the Pinot Noir. So that's kind of cool. And that's also why I think our Pinot differentiates us very much from many other Pinots, especially here in the Southern Hemisphere, because we really have done everything we can to enhance the quality of it, especially with these tanks. What was I? Yeah, so that's how I ended up in Chile, and also thought that that's why we ended up back there, because not only did we kind of decide that our kids probably needed to grew up where they kind of with their own inheritance. We couldn't really move to Denmark where I'm from, because there's a lot of beer, but there's hardly any wine, so that didn't make any sense. So that's obviously why we chose to move back. Elqui is yeah, it's a very special place. It's a transversal valley, which means that the mountains, we have no coverage from the ocean, so we get cool ocean winds blowing way up in the valley, as much as 45 miles. So that helps cool down the soils there. We have 3 different plantations. We have a Carmenère on a hillside. We have a Syrah on a plateau, on 2 different plateaus, and then we have a planting that is planted on the old ancient riverbed of the Elqui, which means that there is a lot of gravel, a lot of round rocks, and in general we just have a lot of rocks and minerality, because in some parts of the Elqui Valley it's not more than maybe 200 yards wide, and there we have some of our vineyards. So obviously there's a lot of mountain rock that has rolled down over time, and then there's a lot of sediment from the ancient riverbed. It's extremely poor soils, but that also enhances, I think, the minerality of the wine. And then again, we have the ocean gusts, and it's always windy, so that breeze is blowing 24/7, which obviously helps keep natural fresh acidity, because it gets really cool at nighttime, and that's pretty cool. Anybody has any questions so far? Just throw up your hands if there's anything you want to ask about.
Actually, Steffan, what people can do is just like put a little note on the group chat, and then we can see it, and then I'll talk about it.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I'm not a really good zoomer, so I can just see a couple of you guys. I can't see everybody, and I have really no idea what's going on. I'm just talking out my ass. So
just keep going. You're doing great.
Thank you. I haven't done it enough yet. So, and I know we've probably also lost a couple of people that can't sign on because they have no electricity because of the Snowmageddon. Thank you, Chris. I did see that. So we'll just take it from there. So that's pretty much how I kind of came about and how I ended up back in Chile, because I believed in the soils, and then I was lucky enough to run into this guy that owned a whole bunch of vineyard, and then we teamed up and started the project there in 12. The winery was basically finished in 2013, as I said. We did the first vintage there with very few tanks, and then we over the years have built it up with last year adding a couple of bigger tanks for just pretty much just for blending, because now we have some larger lots like the red blend that we have, which I hope you're all aware of, which is our by far biggest seller. So now the winery stands finished. We have also acquired a bottling line, so now we can bottle on site. We got that a couple of years ago. It took us a couple of years to get it to work, but now it's running. We actually just bottled some stuff, and we will again bottle some stuff for Kurt here within the next few weeks. Yes, I see some similarities definitely between some of the rocks and some of our rocks. There's no doubt that the earthiness and the minerality has a common thread in those two different regions, which is kind of fun, because a lot of the scenery down here, a lot of the soils, except for the rock, because in Washington State is almost only in Walla Walla and the rocks districts where you have all the rocks. Here we have rocks all over. But I see some similarities to when you go into valley. I mean, I'm living on the coast here, so La Serena is a coastal city. So, but as you venture into the valley, you see some similarities to some of the more desert-like climate, as you would say, as Eastern Washington they have. Yes, yep. Yes, that's exactly right. It's quite fertile, and we're very alluvial. We don't have any rainfall here at all, hardly. And when it does rain here, it turns really bad, because the soils are so compact and dry. That is, if we do have a rain here, we have had some rains actually over the years that has the vineyards are pretty much about the closest one we have is about 20 miles from the ocean. And then the furthest in valley we have, where we have Malbec, is around 35 miles, I would call it. And then I was asked about, so again, just getting back and quickly to the soils there between Walla Walla, as you said, Kurt, Walla Walla gets a lot of rainfall and stuff, and we don't at all. Which also makes, and so we have no rain in the spring, we have no frost in the fall, which means also we have the perfect hang time. We probably have a month more hang time than in most places of the world, which also means that our the fruit sitting on the wine, I mean, the more hang time you get, the more flavor you get, and we don't get high sugar accumulation, so the sugars accumulate rather slowly, which means that we never feel pressured to harvest. In terms of the red blend, as I got a question about, about the winemaking on that and the blending process. It's pretty much every year. You guys that are familiar with it always see that there's a slight change of percentages on it, and it really all depends on the year. I like to make the red blend in a very fruity, lush, soft and smooth style. So it's not always the same lots that goes into that wine. It depends on the year, as I said, and how the different blocks and how the different vineyard sites have kind of taken the year in. But it's always the little on the fruitier lots, the bigger and more earthy ones goes into the more expensive wines. And then of course there's the part of the blending process. All the different lots have to fit together to make the perfect red blend that can go with everything from pizza to steak and to barbecue and chicken and all that stuff. But I think it's a very food friendly wine. It's very easy to drink and it's very smooth. So that's kind of my philosophy behind it. It just has to be a really, really solid wine, but also very, very easy to understand. So, and that one has been, we're going to bottle around 8,000 cases now here of the 17. So that's pretty much what we have of that one. And it sells out pretty damn fast, which is cool. Because people like it, and it's a good, I think it's a good price quality ratio. And that's another thing also about all the other wines. I try to set my prices so that people feel that they get a good quality, of really good quality for the price of wine that they that they pay for. I've often heard when I do tasting in the US, because I still work there as a consultant, but I mean, when people, because wines in Washington State, an example, out of Walla Walla Shiraz, they're really expensive, and mine is a half or third the price. And I'm like, wow, why is it so cheap? I was like, well, it just is. So I'm happy that people recognize the effort that we do in making the wines, and also the effort we do in keeping the prices at a very, very reasonable level. Any further questions? Should we go on with some wines? So, yeah, well, the main differences between Mendoza and us. Well, if we talk about Mendoza, and Kirk knows a lot about this, he definitely would know more than me, since he makes wine from there. Again, we're a coastal area. Mendoza is extremely hot. Lots of sun. Do you have anything to chip in about Mendoza, Kirk, on that real quick?
I mean, what I've always known, and it's not an oversimplification, it's just, I think, essential in understanding the kind of the essential differences between Chile and Argentina, is that Chile is coastal. Yes. When I worked for Kendall Jackson, they loved Chile because they said it was just like California. And they didn't like Mendoza, particularly one, because it's hot, one, because it's continental, or two, because it's continental, and three, people were just starting to move up the valleys in altitude to achieve those colder nights.
Yes.
It's one of the silver linings of global warming, that people woke up pretty quick to moving up valleys in Argentina. So now they're capturing a lot more.
And also moving down south.
Yeah, and they're moving down south. Patagonia's probably going to boom over the next several years because of that. That's
even here in Chile, there's a lot of people making wine out of the Biobío region now, which is a quite cool area. One thing I would like to add about the Elqui is that there are these what is considered cool climate areas in Chile, which is called San Antonio and Casablanca. Some parts in the Elqui are actually cooler than that, which makes no sense because we're bordering the Atacama Desert. So that's also an anomaly, which is kind of hard to fathom because we're so far north compared to those guys, and that also makes the whole little area very interesting indeed. So, and then I saw a question about Pinot also, and I believe it was something about most of the Pinots that you have tried out of Chile's lacks some silkiness and stuff. Is that correct? Oh.
Sorry, I just unmuted. Yeah, just historically, I've tried quite a few Pinots down there, and they don't quite have the character and complexity of, you know, say something that you would get you know, in a better growing region in California or Willamette. And I'm kind of just wondering, you know, why that is, do you think, and how do you go about trying to get those complexities in your Pinot, since, you know, you do have the baseline of working in the States?
Yeah, I do. And I think also many of my wines, I mean, I like really rich and silky and smooth wines. So that's also one of my go-to in my winemaking philosophy, is that the wines have to be extremely smooth and rich and upon release, but also can develop over time. But the question about Chilean Pinot is that I just don't think that some of these larger producers here understand Pinot and understand that it's so finicky, and how to make it in a rich and silky way, because they might use pumps to pump it over during the fermentation, which is really a no-no, because it's gonna extract all the harsh tannins out of the seeds, if there are any, and then they always harvest. Some of them harvest extremely early, way too early before the wine has to. I mean, we harvest early also. I harvest maybe at 22.5 brix, which is not 24 or 26, which you can experience in California, but then you get those really plum and rich Pinots. Sometimes you just harvest too early, so the wine turns out a little too fruity, a little harsh, and then they treat it bad during the winemaking process and put it in the bottle maybe even too early also. My Pinots are again punched down for 2 to 3 weeks with nitrogen gas running over them 24/7 to protect the top of the tank. Also get to wine says that, yep, we'll do that. So that's definitely one of the differences, that we harvest the Pinot at the right time, we have the right location, we have the right soil. How many cases in total of what? Of the whole production, or just Pinot Noir? Okay, the total. We are around, I would say, well, it depends on, now we're starting bottling a new vintage, and how much are we going to bottle? Maybe we're up to about 10,000 cases of Elqui, and then we do some custom stuff on the side also. So I mean, we were far from where we can be, but the Elqui brand is pretty much where we need it to be. I think I would like the Elqui brand to grow to around 10,000 cases in total between all the wines. We're also putting out some rosé, remember, and I'm going to just add some white again. If I still make Pisco, no. I have a brand made up for Pisco, so we might put out a Pisco pretty soon under the Elqui brand, and it's a pretty cool label. But that's kind of still in the making. So do we want to start with some wine? Okay. So I think that what we should do first, I don't know if anybody is going to taste with me or just see me gurgle some wine and talk about it. So some of the ones of you that have the wines, I mean, I think just for the hell of it, I mean, I know the Pinot belongs to the other price level, but I think we should start out with that one, because it's just, you know, it's a lighter style wine, even compared to the red one. So what I have here is the 16 Pinot. That's all I got down here right now. We're going to bottle 17 pretty quickly, and I'm going to send some samples to Kurt of what we have. I'm going to send some tank samples. Here, 17 Pinot Noir. very light in color. We have our wines turn. They have a great, I mean, they have a really Pinotish color, but they have a tendency to turn a little brick pretty quickly. But they still last for a long time. I mean, the first one I made in 2012, I had it at the end of last year, and it was still vibrant as hell, and it was drinking really well. So it's not all about the color. This here is real Pinot without any Syrah blended into it, like many do in California. So let's give it a whirl. Yeah, so lots of like nice clones. This is 100% 777. The clone, which is definitely known from California. I don't know if there's any 777 in Oregon, but I assume there is.
There's lots and lots of 777.
This one here is aged for 2 years in old French oak barrels. I actually bought some years ago. I bought a full 40-foot container from a winery that you might all know called William Selliam. So I'm using their older barrels to age my Pinot. As again, if we go back to the silkiness and the richness and the smoothiness, I think we accomplish that every year with our Pinot. Nice long finish, nice fruit, and it just has that really nice Pinotish taste to it. So 2 year in barrel and 1 year in tank. That's why we're bottling the 17 now. And again, we don't make so much of it. We used to make more, but we had a flood a few years back that actually killed two of our blocks. So we have one block left only now. So the amount of Pinot that we're going to be putting out in the next few years will be rather dim compared to what we used to. But we're looking into plan. What makes? Oh, I didn't see what makes it a Reserva. I just lost that question. I have something about Reserva. Oh. No, there are no. That's the fun thing about this all down here. There are no rules for anything. There are 3 different layers. There's the varietal level, there is Reserva, and then there's Gran Reserva, which people use, but there are no rules for it at all. There's nothing people you can call. Well, I never call it Great Gran Reserva if I wanted to. That's also why I have chosen to not put any sort of that on the label. You see, it doesn't say varietal, it doesn't say Reserva, no Gran Reserva, because it makes no sense, because there's no classification at all. So that's definitely one of the reasons why we just make the wine as good as we can. Any quick questions about the Pinot, or should we venture on to the red blend? Here we go with the red blend. So as I explained about the red blend, I have the 16 here. I think it's the one that you guys might have also, depending on where you're at. As I said, this is our go-to wine, our biggest seller, and also a bit lower price than the other wines. It's always the most fruity lot of the year that goes into this year between the Syrah, the Carmenere, and the Malbec. So that's why the percentage always changes from year to year. The one we're going to bottle now, the 17, is going to be a little less. The 16 is 60% Carmenere, 36 Malbec, and 14 Syrah. The new one we're going to bottle has a little less car, so it's not so Carmenere dominated. It's only 44%, but it's still a hell of a wine. So let's give this one a try. Yeah, and then by the way, the Pinot is also aged in. It's aged for 2 years, but some of the barrels are also new, but they're all untoasted. That we don't have any. We don't hardly have any oak influence. What we have is just a lift of the fruit. the red blend here has about every year about 35 to 40% new medium plus French barrels on it. Again, I think what it needs to do is soft and rich and have a hell of an entry, and just fills out your mouth. Long finish, and very, very enjoyable and easy to get accustomed to. It's super lush. And again, it's a fun wine that I enjoy making every year, and especially enjoy it when because it's a lot of, no, the red blend is medium plus French barrels, the part that is new on it. And yes, we do our own viticulture. So again, that's my partner's and his. We have a vineyard team, so that's his one of his what do you call it, chores in the whole project is to take care of the vineyard. So yeah, we do that. We don't source grapes; they're ours. So. Yeah, earth-friendly practices. We don't use any herbicides because we don't have to. So that's another good thing about the Elqui. Our sustainable practices are, well, they're not easy, but they are there because again we have such a perfect climate that we hardly have any insects. We don't have the sharpshooters or whatever they're called in California, and we don't have hardly any nematodes. They have a bit of that in the south because the soil is a bit richer. So we don't really, in the Elqui, because it's so dry and it's so protected, it's far away from everything, and we don't have any large vineyards around that can infect us. So we're not organic, and I don't think we will be, because the process down here is extremely long and very costly. And right now I just want to focus on making the best wines that we can. I would love one day to get a certification that we are organic, but I don't have that now. But we definitely farm sustainable. The only thing we can have a little bit problem is, because it's also a very humid region, is some rut. No herbicides or pesticides, right? So about the climate change, I didn't see that because I had two coming in right away. If climate change has any effect on our vintages, was that the question?
No, more of, you mentioned that you really have a perfect climate there. I'm saying, does your climate, the fact that it's so well suited, does that limit your vintage variation? Do you feel like your wines are pretty consistent flavor profile from vintage to vintage in comparison to other regions?
Yes, I think that's our luck, and that's one of the advantages also that we have, that we have extremely stable weather. I mean, there's always a little vintage variation. Might be a warmer summer, that might be a little cooler spring and stuff like that. But I would say that if you see it across the board and taste our vintages against each other, there is a very fine red line in terms of quality between them. So there are hardly any swings in terms of grape quality, which is obviously great for us. We don't get hails like they do in Burgundy. You get nailed. I mean, we have pretty much the perfect growing conditions, which I kind of like, especially as a wine grower and winemaker. That makes it a lot easier to produce some great vintages year in and year out, which I think the consumer, we try to, make our, and then we always adjust a little bit in the winemaking depending on the season, but we try to hit the same quality year in and year out. There might be some flavor profiles are a little bit different. Maybe one year is a little bit bigger, so we can handle some more oak. Maybe one year is a little lighter, so we don't put as much oak on it, etc. But it's steady climate here, which is cool. So, I guess we should try and move on to the next wine. We have also a little bit of an anomaly. I think we should do Malbec if somebody has Malbec. I have the 16 Malbec here. Some of you might have the 15. Malbec is funny because that's has always been known for Argentina and being very Argentina driven, and they did a hell of a job. Okay, you still sell 15. That's cool. So I don't have any. I've been sold out for 15 for a long time, so I had to go up a 16, which we have a little bit left of. Argentina obviously is known for Malbec, as you know, and there's not a lot planted down here. We have about, let me see here. Malbec. I had because I could never remember. Yeah, we have about 3 hectares of Malbec planted in a town called Vicuña, which is a fun variety. In 2012, I didn't really think we should make wine out of it. Well, I only harvested for blending purposes, but then the 2012 Malbec turned out so interesting that we bottled 200 cases of it. It has a certain florality to it and something I had just never seen in Malbec because, again, Pinot Noir and Malbec, we're the first ones that have ever produced that out of the Elqui Valley. So who the hell knew how it was going to taste like? But I just deemed it worthy enough to bottle because it has a whole different expression of Malbec compared to what I've seen before. A lot of earthiness and a lot of florality, especially when it opens up a little bit. Again, smooth and elegant. It's not your big Mendoza powerhouse with tons of oak on it. I find it extremely elegant. It's very extremely present with fruit. Oh, that was a question that I didn't see either. But people have started to, sorry, I missed the answer, but what oaks are we using for the upcoming vintage American? We are mostly on the Pinot Noir. So just to speak about the wines in general, on the Pinot Noir, we are 100% French oak. On the Cabernet, we are 100% French oak. On the Syrah, we're between 85 to 90% French, and the rest is American. On the Malbec, pretty much the same. And on the red blend, probably 10 American and 30% French when we're talking about the new oak. And everything, the remainder of the percentages are obviously neutral use barrels. So, and it kind of stays like that. Again, depending on the vintage, as I said, we use more or less oak, depending what I deem that the wine can kind of handle. I like not to over oak the wine, but oak really has oak, if you buy the right oak, has a tendency to not only lift the body of the wine up, but also lift the fruit more out than if you had not used oak on it. So that's why I use oak. I'm a huge fan. I'm not a huge fan in over oaking. You just have to find the right oak to each different lot. Yes, everything is fermented differently. Everything. The biggest fermenters that I have are about 5 tons. So everything is fermented differently. They go through malolactic. That's another thing that we do down here also. I go through natural malolactic fermentation. That takes about a full year in barrel because at winter time it totally slows off. And then at springtime, when it gets a little warmer, it kicks in again, and then we finish the following spring with the malolactic. Then all the lots get racked. We rack them off the heavy lees. So they sit a year on the fermentation gross lees. We rack them off again separately, and they go back to barrel. And then they're not touched again for a full other year before we do the final blend, which means that the wines only get racked twice in 2 years, which is also an anomaly because some wineries, especially bigger wineries, they rack religiously every 3 months, which also means that they introduce a lot of air to the wines. We try to protect air is obviously an enemy of barrel aging, and especially because we have so many barrels. I have almost all over a small winery, all the wine passes through barrel, go through malolactic in barrel. So I have about 1,000 barrels which is a lot of extra work. So it takes about, we top every 2 weeks, and it takes 2 guys 2 days to get through it all. Everything is inoculated, yes. I do a small portion of natural yeast that gets blended in, but most is inoculated. I haven't seen that natural yeast actually enhances the quality of wine that we produce here. So I would say 5 to 10% is natural, but everything else is inoculated. And then also we do a long fermentation and a long maceration on different wines. I mean, sometimes the Syrah stays on skins up to 40 days from crush to finished ferment to post maceration and before it goes to the barrel. So that's also something we do that not many people do around here. Many people just want to get it in and out because they need the tank for something else. We have built exactly enough tanks so we can have the whole vintage in, so we don't have to turn tanks over if we don't have to. I mean, only if we want to is what I mean. Yeah. So that's also a very big plus in the winemaking, on the winemaking side, you know, that I can do pretty much whatever I want. And that was the whole idea about also making so many extra tanks, which was of course costly, but it turns out that it'll pay itself back eventually. So that was the Malbec. So we move on to the Syrah. Here I don't know what you guys have. I have my 17 Syrah. You might have 16. I'm not sure, but okay, you guys probably, yeah, you guys have 17. So Syrah is of all the higher end wines, is by far the biggest seller. Well, not down here. Down here, Cabernet is the biggest seller. In Europe, the Pinot is the biggest seller, but all across the board, the Syrah is probably the best seller of all the more expensive wines. It's a very special area for Syrah. Syrah likes these very poor, rocky, stony, minerally soils with lots of rock, as I said. So it's been a cool wine to produce. We have about 2.5 hectares of Syrah. Yeah, somewhere around there. In 2 different clones. We have a clone called 174, which is kind of the normal fruity clone that's most widely planted down here in Chile. The good thing is that we don't have very much of it. We're lucky to have another clone called clone 100, which is very dark and meaty. So that's also when I think when you pour the Syrah, it reminds you sometimes there's sometimes hints of like a little bit northern Rhonish notes, but of course with the fruit from the New World. So mostly the Syrah is a blend of 75% clone 100 and 25% 174. What I've begun to do now, because 174 was always fruitier and lighter, what I've done now is that all the 174 is whole cluster fermented. So now going forward, we're going to have a lot of more power and a lot more earthiness and complexity in the Syrah blend, because the 174 has really raised itself in terms of quality level. So it's gonna be cool going forward. The 18 Syrah, which we're gonna bottle, is gonna be the first one which has a really high amount of whole clusters, and it's just an outstanding wine. So again, the style that I like to make is this rich and lush and creamy, lots of mouthfeel, just an extremely pleasant wine to drink with lots of flavor, nice finish, very, very Syrah-ish. Some earthiness, a little bit of minerality. Yeah, I've had somebody mentioned the rocks before. I have had people say, though, because of sometimes it's a little bit bloody and irony also, depending on where that's the aging curve and how it opens up in the bottle. But that reminds them a little bit of some of those Eastern Washington Syrahs, which is not a bad thing because they're pretty cool. And again, just a third of the price of them. So. Any questions or remarks about the Syrah wine before we move on to the last one?
I mean, I would only say that there's some good Syrah in Chile, you know.
Yes.
Companies I've worked for in the past, you know, including Tabali, their like flagship was Syrah, and
Yes.
they're relatively close to you.
At about an hour south.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't maybe you can speak to that, I don't know, but it does seem that Syrah really it does well in Chile, and it seems that I think American consumers are maybe only getting their head around that because Carmenere and because of, you know, so many other things that you know, the whites perhaps just kind of steals attention away from that kind of fundamental realization that Syrah is so delicious from Chile.
No, exactly. I don't think many people have had before a Chilean Syrah, because I mean there's a lot around, but some of the bigger wineries, but now some of us more boutique wineries have started to try to produce what we like to think world-class Syrahs, and I think definitely that Chile has the potential to become a huge player in very high quality Syrah, and we're just getting started. I mean, I'm only 8 years into it now, and we have produced Syrahs from the get-go that were incredible.
I want to say one other thing too, just for the audience. I don't know if everybody feels this way, but it's only been very recently that I've begun to feel that the stigma or the boredom with Syrah, it seems to be fading away a little bit. You know, you know, I've lived this for a long time, but that's, you know, that story of kind of Australian Shiraz really kind of turned the world off to Syrah, it seemed like, for a while. You know, you could sell, you know, you could sell anything except Syrah, people would say to me. And now that just seems to be not as true. And consumers that didn't live through that legacy or that doesn't have that baggage, they, you know, I see them in tasting room, and they just say that they just love Syrah, you know, that's just what tastes good to them. If they can talk about wine at all, a lot of them, you know, identify it as something that they really like to taste. So I don't know, it maybe it's going to have its day here again.
I think it will, because speaking on my part, because I've made Syrah both in Chile and in the United States. And I can definitely see that, especially people in the United States, as you said, are starting to wrap their heads around Syrah again, and it's selling really well. You can hardly put a Syrah out there that doesn't sell out in a matter of like pretty quickly, actually, because there is a lot of Syrah fans, even people that were like, as you said, there was this stigma about Syrah, and people were like, oh shit, now you can't sell it. When it first came out there, you could sell it fairly well, I think, but then there came a lot of years where nobody wanted to touch Syrah, but now it's definitely coming back. It's on the rise, and I think it could be really big, which is good for me especially, and for all of us, I hope.
I would love it, because my first job was in Shiraz, so I mean, it'd be nice to, you know, sell it again. You know? Yeah,
and it's just a cool, different type of red wine, because it delivers something different than the others. They do not. So it's fun to make and it's fun to drink. Should we move on to the flagship of all Chilean wines, the Carmenere?
Right after we unseated it.
Exactly. So yes, we have Carmenere. But we have the best Carmenere vineyard in the entire country, so we should be okay. So about the Carmenere planting, it's actually the Carmenere that we have. We have our 6.5 hectares of Carmenere in 2 different locations. The 5 hectare plot was planted actually fairly close to the ocean, about these 18 miles from the ocean, and sitting right on the ancient riverbed, on all the stone, and with the sandy alluvial soil, and very poor. It's actually one of the oldest plantings in the entire Elqui. It was planted in 1997, which doesn't, I mean, it's not that impressive in terms of 100-year-old Burgundy plantings or 200-year-olds or however old they are. but it's since we're a new region, I mean, there definitely will have to be considered old wines for our area at least. I don't know a clone. It's a Massel clone that we somehow got from some dude down in the Maipo region, and it got planted, and it's just doing extremely well. So I have the 17 here. Told I got the 16 is sold out. What is fun about this planting is also that it's sitting in a little bit. Okay, you have 16, yeah. But it's sitting in a little bit cooler area also. Lots of cool winds from the Pacific, and it's down on the low right there on the very very dry riverbed. Cabernet likes lots of sun, and it gets it very well. I mean, the Elqui Valley is also known for observatories. It's extremely sunny there. We have a lot of radiation from the sun because we're closer to the equator than most winemaking regions. That also helps. So what happens to the Cabernet is that it gets extremely spicy because again we have the lower night temperatures, but it ripens perfectly without that green herbal methoxypyrazine. It's called the green, extremely disgusting green bell pepper flavor, which ruins many a Cabernet. We still have the herbal aspect of it, but it incorporates with the fruit quite well, I think. So if any of you have it in the glass, let's try it out. So super spicy. This is also, I always taste this at the end because this is also our most tannic wine. But they're very fine grained and they sit on the gum for a little bit, for a minute or two, and then they kind of fade away, and you're just left with this spice and lushiness and fleshiness in the mouth. And I think for Cabernet, talking about Cabernet, I think this year is a very good, if not one of the best examples of Cabernet in all of Chile, and I'm just lucky enough to be able to work with this vineyard here, and we obviously take care of it because it is kind of one of our small jewels. Oh, sorry, I didn't see that from.
Oh, sorry. You're saying the Cabernet is the best it's ever been. Are you talking specifically about which harvest, 2021 or
I think the 16 and 17 have been, yeah. But we have since 16 we have really been on a roll with Cabernet vintages. We just blended the 2020 Cabernet actually last week, and it's outstanding. The 19 is outstanding. The 8, I mean, everything going on with Cabernet right now within the last 4 or 5 years we're just on a roll. So that's quite fortunate. It makes it easier to sell also that the wine's not shit. Yes, I do feel that the vegetal nature is more common in other areas, especially down in some of the southern regions where they don't have the right climate for it. It might be planted in too fertile of a soil, especially down in the central area where they can have some really thick, heavy clayey soils, which Cabernet doesn't like. Cabernet likes dry, poor soil and lots of sun, and we can deliver that up here, which is and then ours also has the freshness because we again get the breezes from the ocean, as I talked about. So down south, it's a little bit more problematic because it also rains down there. They just had a big rain where some vineyards were ruined about 70% with rot. The problem with Cabernet is that's the very latest of all. It's funny, it's the first one to flower, but it's the latest to ripen. So it needs a very long growing season. And again, as we said, we don't have any precipitation up here. So we can ripen it perfectly every year, where they can't do it down south. It's kind of on and off. Yes, early harvesting is definitely one of the big problems. That's when you get It's not only a very green herbal flavor, it's also an extremely unpleasant tannin. Where you see if you taste our Cabernet, our tannins are fine grained and very rich. And that's a big difference also. There are some parts of Colchagua where it's a little bit warmer, where they make some fairly decent Caramellas, but further south, ugh, I think that's also why people have been turned off to Caramel a little bit, because there's been put so much out from down here that is not what it's supposed to be. Yes, harvesting early sometimes is to avoid rain, definitely, and also because people don't understand Caramel well enough, although they should, because they worked at it for a long time. But some people harvest just upon the numbers that they need. Maybe because a bigger winery has, now we need to harvest the Cabernet because now we have tanks open, so we need to get it in and in the barrel. And then again, the rains that comes, then you're forced to harvest there. They have been harvesting down their reds because of the rains that are not ripe at all. And that's obviously a shame. And many of them are, what does that mean? Don't they have, yeah, well, don't they have tongues? Yeah. Yeah, but yeah.
I mean, I'll say something too. Just, you have to understand that Carmenere has been produced in Chile for a long time, and
Yeah.
and a lot of growers, I mean, particularly because of where they're massed and where they originated from, you know, the Central Valley growers, the people outside Colchagua, they're used to that green element, and I think in a certain respect they take a little bit of pride in it as their house style, and that's their native, you know, kind of palate. You know, it took an international community to start to push back and say this, you know, because for a long time they because of that they developed this kind of, it tastes Chilean or it tastes herbaceous. Oh, it must be from Chile, and that was, I think, really derived from, you know, Central Valley fruit and early picking and avoiding rain and all of those things that suddenly the pendulum swung back on.
And that's what they've always done, so they just continue to do it. And also another thing, a fun thing about that, back in, I don't remember, was it back in the early 90s, where there was people couldn't understand down there why their Merlots were tasting so herbal and green, even though they thought they harvested them at, you know, at the right time. But then it turned out by a DNA leaf study that we're talking about thousands and thousands of hectares that were planted as Merlot, but were actually Carmenere. And the reason why they were so hellish green was that Merlot is an early ripening red variety. Carmenere ripens way later. So they planted Carmenere as Merlot in these sites where they thought they could ripen it well, but they just couldn't, because that herbaceousness and that awful herbal flavor was there. So a DNA study was done, and so that makes sense.
Well,
yes, some of it was in the Martina vineyard, yeah, but it was pretty much all over.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Ramona. Thank you. We work hard on it every day.
Yeah, it is interesting that Elqui does, you know, being what it is, that very poor soils, that very kind of transversal valley with the cool winds blowing in, the long hang time, the fact that it's so pest free, is in fact, it seems quite alternative to Chile, you know,
Yes.
because it is so set apart. It's almost a country, and particularly because Chile's so long, you could, you know, it could have been, if history had been different, it could have been a bunch of different countries, you know. And it is hard, I think, to lump everything in Chile as one thing, you know.
Yes, correct. And then the good thing about the whole thing is also the Elqui Valley is so small that none of the big guys, even though they wanted to, can come in here and plant, you know, 200 hectares of one thing to make a brand. There are some bigger wineries up here that has some small Elqui, thanks, Mark, some small Elqui projects, and they say it's their own vineyards, but it's really not. It's just a couple of growers that grows a little bit of Syrah, and then they bring it down to San Pedro, and then they have their own Syrah label, la la la. So they can't really come up here, and that's also why I chose to call it Elqui Wines, because I wanted to try to. Thanks, Mike. I wanted to try to monopolize the area in some sort with our brand strategy, and lucky enough, we actually got it. I didn't think it would go through as a trademark, but it did. So, so that was cool.
There's one other thing I wanted to say before we go. It's a realization that we made a long time ago, but I don't think we've all spoken about it, because I see Clayton's on the call, Garrett's on the call, Abigail is on the call, and then back in the day when they all worked at, well, those two still do, and Abigail now works for me, but we went to a trip and we're at Altair, I think in 2005, when you were volunteer, being a crush, crush assistant, and we were all there together, which is funny that now years later, we're all in kind of in a little bit of different orbits in some respects, but we're all kind of still we came back together, which is, I think, kind of neat. You on that harvest, you met Pamela, who's
yes.
Partner on the project. So it's just that's an interesting thing.
No, that's rather interesting and quite the coincidence.
Yeah. I just want to thank everybody. It's another great Zoom. I'll send a schedule out for a few other ones that we'll do in the coming weeks. If anybody else has a question, feel free to hang around a little bit. I can stay on for the next few minutes. Then I have to jump on a distributor call. But thank you, everybody. We had a really good showing again today. Feel free to send either questions now or email me questions for Steffan. He can answer directly. Thanks for supporting the wines. I do believe the wines are so terrific and so standout and so affordable. And it seems like people are finally waking up and realizing that, so it's starting to show.
Yeah, well, I also just want to jump on there and say thank you to everybody that participated, and we're extremely happy about working with Elixir, and we're extremely happy about having all of you guys' support. And yeah, trust us, and we say that we do our best every day to produce the absolute best wine that we absolutely can. So we'll never go down on quality.
Yeah, no, I think it shows.
Thank you.
All right, well, cool.
If there's no, yep.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you.
Love your wines.